Street garbage in a borrowed dress.
Kill the merger.
The wine surged through my veins like liquid fire, hot and sharp, a stark contrast to the icy calm I forced upon my face. I watched Donovan Harrington's words form in slow motion, his lips curling around them with a connoisseur's satisfaction. My fingernails dug crescents into my palms, the small, sharp pain a welcome anchor in a room that was suddenly blurring at the edges. The constellation of crystal glasses and diamond necklaces melting into a Monet painting of polite horror. His voice was a velvet hammer, somehow both muffled by the blood pounding in my ears and painfully, surgically clear. "My son," he announced, his gaze sweeping across the room full of his country club friends and business associates, "deserves better than someone from the gutter." He let the words hang in the air, each one a perfectly polished stone of contempt, before his eyes landed on me. Street garbage in a borrowed dress, pretending to belong in our world. Silence, the clinking of silverware fell silent. The low hum of conversation died instantly. 23 pairs of eyes, all reflecting the candlelight from the grand chandelier, swiveled between Donovan and me. Their expressions a mixture of shock, pity, and a morbid curiosity. They were waiting to see if the nobody dadding the prince would dare respond to the king in his castle. I felt each frantic heartbeat in my throat, a trapped bird fluttering against its cage. With deliberate, measured movements, I methodically folded the damask napkin, a piece of fabric that probably cost more than my first apartment's rent. I placed it beside my untouched plate of overpriced salmon. Every instinct screamed at me to throw the wine in his face, to shatter the crystal and his smug superiority with it. But that wasn't my way. My revenge would be colder, quieter, and far, far more expensive. I pushed my chair back and stood slowly, my spine straight. "Thank you for dinner, Mr. Harrington," I said, my voice even and clear, cutting through the suffocating silence. I met his arrogant gaze without flinching, "and thank you for finally being honest about how you feel." I let my eyes drift over the frozen faces at the table before turning my attention to the invisible audience beyond the room. "My name is Elena Thorne. I'm 32 years old and a self-made entrepreneur. And this is the story of how I transformed a public humiliation into the most expensive lesson a man ever learned." "Elena, don't." Leo's voice was a desperate whisper, his hand grabbing mine before I could turn away from the table. I looked down at his fingers intertwined with mine, then up at his tear-streaked face. I squeezed his hand gently, a silent promise, and then deliberately let go. "It's fine, love," I said, my voice soft enough for only him to hear, though I was keenly aware of the 23 pairs of ears straining to listen. "Your father's right, I should know my place." The smirk that bloomed on Donovan's face was a thing of pure, unadulterated arrogance. I cataloged it, filed it away for later. That self-satisfied expression of a man who thought he'd won, who believed he'd finally and definitively driven away the street rat who dared to touch his precious son. If only he knew. I walked out of that dining room with my head held high, each step measured and soundless on the antique Persian rug. The silence that followed me was a physical thing, a heavy blanket smothering the room. I walked past the priceless Monet in the hallway, its water lilies serene and indifferent. I walked past the uniformed servants who suddenly found the intricate patterns of the marble floor fascinating, their eyes cast down in a practiced dance of non-involvement. I walked past the gleaming Bentley in the circular driveway, the one Donovan had made a point of mentioning cost more than I'd make in 5 years. As I crossed the vast, echoing foyer, I felt like a ghost haunting a life that was never meant to be mine. Good ghosts were underestimated. Ghosts had unfinished business. Leo caught up to me just as I reached my car, my sensible, reliable sedan that Donovan had visibly sneered at when I'd first pulled up. "Elena, please stop," he begged, grabbing my arm, his face a mess of shame and sorrow. "I'm so sorry, I had no idea." I swear I didn't know he was going to do that. I turned and pulled him into a hug, burying my face in his shoulder for a moment, inhaling the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with the salt of his tears. "This isn't your fault, Leo," I whispered, holding him tight. He pulled back, his hands framing my face. "I'll talk to him, I'll make him apologize." "No," I said, my voice firm but gentle as I tucked a stray strand of his dark hair behind his ear. "No more apologizing for him, no more making excuses. He said what he's been thinking for the past year. At least now we both know where we stand." "Elena, please don't let him ruin us," he pleaded, his voice cracking. I kissed his forehead, a lingering final touch. "He can't ruin what's real," I said, and I meant it. But I also knew I had to create distance, not for my sake but for his. The war I was about to declare would have shrapnel, and I needed him out of the blast radius. "I'll call you tomorrow, okay?" He nodded reluctantly, his eyes filled with a pain I couldn't yet soothe. I got into my car and drove away from the Harrington estate. In my rearview mirror, I watched the mansion grow smaller, its brilliant lights twinkling like a constellation of stars I was supposedly never meant to reach. My phone started buzzing before I even hit the main road, the screen lighting up with his mother's name. I ignored it. They weren't bad people, just weak ones orbiting a tyrant too afraid of his gravity to break free. But I had more important calls to make. The Harrington estate vanished from my rearview mirror, and with it, the woman who had politely endured humiliation. In her place sat the CEO. I merged onto the highway, the steady rhythm of the tires on the asphalt a calming metronome. The city lights began to rise in the distance, a glittering promise of the world I had built for myself, a world Donovan Harrington didn't even know existed. I tapped the button on my steering wheel, voice dial Maya. The car system chimed, calling Maya, it confirmed. She picked up on the first ring, her voice crisp and professional despite the late hour. "Miss Thorne, is everything all right?" Maya had been with me for 6 years, since before the world knew who Elena Thorne really was. She could read my moods from a single-word email. "Cancel the Harrington Industries merger," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Silence, a beat of pure, unadulterated shock, then the professional kicked in. "Ma'am," she said, her tone carefully neutral, "we're scheduled to sign the final papers on Monday morning at 9. The due diligence is complete, the financing is secured, everything is in place." "I'm aware," I replied, smoothly changing lanes to pass a slow-moving truck. "Kill it. The termination fees alone will be." "I don't care about the fees, Maya. Send the official notice to their legal team tonight. Cite irreconcilable differences in corporate culture and vision." "Elena," she dropped the formalities, which she only ever did when she thought I was making a catastrophic mistake or when someone had hurt me. "This is a $2 billion deal, whatever happened at that dinner." "He called me garbage," I said flatly, in front of a room full of people. "He made it crystal clear that someone like me will never be good enough for his family, or, by extension, his business." The shift in her tone was instantaneous. The concern was replaced by a cold fury that mirrored my own. "That bastard," I could hear the sharp, furious clatter of her keyboard through the phone's speaker. Her loyalty was a weapon, and she was already sharpening it. It reminded me of the day I hired her. I wasn't in a skyscraper then. I was in a cramped coffee shop working off a sputtering laptop. She was a waitress, taking an endless stream of abuse from a patron at the next table. She didn't cry or yell. She just handled him with a lethal politeness that dismantled his arrogance piece by piece until he was left sputtering and embarrassed. I had walked over to her after he left and said, "I can't pay you much right now, but I'm building something, and I need people who know how to win a fight without ever raising their voice." She started the next day. Her loyalty hadn't been bought, it had been earned. "I'll have our legal team draw up the termination papers within the hour," she said, her voice all business again. "Want me to leak it to the financial press tonight?" Not yet, I said, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. Let him wake up to the official notice first, the professional blow before the public one. We'll let the media have it by noon tomorrow. With pleasure, ma'am, she said, the satisfaction evident in her voice. Anything else? I thought for a moment, my eyes on the distant city skyline. The first domino had fallen. Now it was time to line up the rest. Yes, I said. Set up a meeting with Fairchild Corporation for first thing Monday morning. If Harrington Industries won't sell, maybe their biggest competitor will. Maya's sharp intake of breath was audible. You're going to buy his rival instead. Why not? I replied, my voice laced with ice. Garbage has to stick together, right? I hung up and drove the rest of the way to my penthouse in a profound, ringing silence. The city lights blurred past my window, no longer just twinkling stars but a sprawling circuit board of my own design. Each light was a connection, a transaction, a life, a part of the electric ecosystem I secretly controlled. Donovan Harrington thought he knew me. He'd run his background checks, of course. His private investigators would have handed him a neat little file detailing my life story, a tragedy he could read with detached pity. He knew I'd grown up poor, that I'd bounced between foster homes, that I'd started working at 14, and that I'd clawed my way through community college and then university fueled by sheer determination and an unhealthy amount of cheap caffeine. He saw the starting line and thought he knew the whole race. What his expensive investigators failed to uncover, what wasn't in any public record, was the ghost in the machine. He didn't know that the scrappy kid he looked down on had spent the last decade building a silent empire. He didn't know that Oratech, the revolutionary tech firm his own company was desperately trying to merge with to save itself from obsolescence, was mine. He didn't know that I had spent the last 10 years acquiring critical patents, poaching the brightest minds from his competitors, and strategically positioning myself to become the invisible kingmaker of our entire industry. He didn't know because I never wanted him to. Early on, I learned a crucial lesson. In a world run by men like Donovan, a woman's power is often magnified by her anonymity. Visibility makes you a target, invisibility makes you a threat. So I built my empire from the shadows, using a network of holding companies and a trusted, brilliant executive named Julian Croft, a respectable man in his late 60s, as the public face of my operations. Julian handled the ribbon cuttings and the shareholder meetings. I handled the strategy. It was the perfect arrangement. It allowed me to move freely, to assess deals and people without the baggage of a public profile. It was my ultimate litmus test. Men like Donovan would meet me, see a woman with a rough past, and dismiss me. They would meet Julian, see a man who looked just like them, and respect him. Their prejudice was their fatal blind spot, and my anonymity was the trap I set to exploit it. Donovan Harrington didn't just insult his son's girlfriend last night. He spat in the face of the one person holding the lifeline his entire legacy depended on. He just didn't know it yet. Donovan called my past a gutter. He wasn't entirely wrong. But what a man like him could never understand is that the gutter is a crucible. It either breaks you, or it forges you into something unbreakable. My hunger wasn't just for success. It was a primal, all-consuming need for a life I could control, a life where no one could ever again tell me I was worthless. That hunger wasn't born in a boardroom. It was born in the cold silence of a dozen different foster homes. I remember being 7, sitting on the edge of a lumpy twin bed in a new house that smelled of disinfectant and someone else's cooking. I had a single tattered copy of The Count of Monte Cristo, a book I'd salvaged from a library discard pile. I kept it hidden under my mattress, my only possession, reading it by the sliver of light from the hallway until the words blurred. The other kids had parents who came for weekend visits. I had a social worker with a tired smile and a stack of paperwork. I learned early that the only person I could truly rely on was myself. By 16, I had aged out of the system and into a new kind of invisibility. There were nights I slept on the cold concrete floor of a 24-hour laundromat, the rhythmic churning of the dryers a lullaby of survival. I learned to look for warmth in public libraries and sustenance in the free samples at grocery stores. The hunger was a constant, gnawing ache in my stomach, but it was overshadowed by a much deeper hunger, the hunger for knowledge. I knew that education was the only weapon I had, the only key that could unlock a different future. So I worked. I scrubbed grease traps in the back of a greasy spoon diner from midnight to 6 a.m., the smell of stale oil clinging to my clothes. I stocked shelves in the cavernous silence of a grocery warehouse, my body aching with a fatigue so deep it felt like it was in my bones. And in every spare moment, on a 10-minute break on the long bus ride between jobs, I was studying. I had flashcards for calculus held together with a rubber band, my textbooks bought secondhand, their pages filled with the notes of students who had a future I was desperately trying to steal. Donovan saw a girl who came from nothing. He never bothered to see the woman who was willing to do anything to build something. He saw the free school lunches, but not the nights I went without eating to save money for a textbook. He saw the community college transcript, but not the 4 GPA I maintained while working 30 hours a week. That hunger, that relentless driving force born from desperation, became my superpower. It taught me to see value where others saw none. It taught me to spot potential in the overlooked and the underestimated. And most importantly, it taught me that men like Donovan Harrington, men who had never been hungry a day in their lives, were soft. They were complacent, and they had no idea what a truly hungry person was capable of. I met Leo at a charity fundraiser for a city youth shelter, one of the very shelters I had once slept in. It was an event I funded anonymously every year, my quiet way of paying a debt to the past. He was there not as a guest, but as a volunteer, his tuxedo sleeves rolled up, serving food to the donors his father had forced to attend. I was introduced to him as Elena Thorne, a consultant for a few tech startups. It was my standard cover, a vague and unassuming description that allowed me to move through the world without the armor of being a CEO. For the first 3 months of our relationship, that's who I was. It was a test, a selfish one perhaps, but a necessary one. I needed to know if he would fall for Elena Thorne, the woman who could talk for hours about obscure coding languages and had a ridiculously competitive streak in Scrabble, or if he was just another man looking for a connection to power. He fell for Elena. He loved that I was a workaholic, that I could be intense, that I had a past I was reluctant to talk about. He never pushed, never pried, he was just kind. A deep, genuine kindness that was so alien in the cutthroat corporate world I inhabited. He was a port in a storm I hadn't realized I was weathering. When I finally told him the truth one night in my apartment, showing him the Forbes article that named the enigmatic, unseen head of Oratech as one of the most influential figures in technology, he just stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he looked at me and he didn't see a billionaire, he just saw me. He laughed and said, "Well, that explains why you're so much better at Scrabble than I am." He didn't care about the money, he was in awe of the journey. He was the real deal. That's why I agreed to meet his family, even though every survival instinct I had honed over the years was screaming at me not to. Our first meeting was a formal brunch at the estate, a carefully staged affair. Donovan was deceptively charming at first, a predator circling its prey with a polite smile. "So, Elena," he'd said, his eyes scanning my simple, off-the-rack dress with an appraiser's coldness. "Leo tells us you're in technology, a rather broad field. What exactly is it you do?" I gave him my practiced, understated answer. "I run a small consulting firm." "Charming," he replied, the word dripping with condescension. "It takes a certain grit to make a go of it from the ground up." It was a backhanded compliment, a verbal pat on the head for the poor girl trying to play with the big boys. I saw Leo's jaw tighten, his mother Amelia fluttering nervously, trying to change the subject. I just smiled. Even then, I wasn't just his son's girlfriend, I was a CEO evaluating a hostile actor. I saw the fear he commanded, the way his wife and daughter deferred to his every whim. I saw that his kindness was a performance and his power was a cudgel. I knew then that a man like that could never see me as an equal. He could only see me as something to be conquered or discarded. Last night's dinner wasn't an aberration, it was an inevitability. The elevator opened directly into my penthouse, a world of glass, steel, and silence. The space was the antithesis of the Harrington estate, where theirs was filled with the heavy, suffocating weight of inherited antiques and old money. Mine was minimalist, modern, and sharp. It was a space designed for clarity, not for clutter. I walked past the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city a glittering tapestry at my feet, and went straight to the bar. I poured myself 2 fingers of a 25-year-old scotch, a bottle that cost more than my first car, and settled onto the sprawling leather sofa on the balcony. The cool night air was a welcome balm against the residual heat of my anger. Somewhere out there, in one of those opulent mansions clinging to the hills, Donovan Harrington was probably celebrating his victory, basking in the glow of having put the gutter trash back in her place. I wondered how long it would take. How long until the news of a terminated $2 billion merger filtered down from the legal department to the C-suite on a Friday night? How long until the king in his castle realized the ground beneath his throne had just turned to quicksand? My phone lit up on the table beside me, the screen displaying a name I knew well: Martin Keating, Harrington Industries Chief Financial Officer. That was faster than expected. The panic must have been immediate. Martin was a sharp, numbers-driven man, and he would have understood the catastrophic implications of my move in a nanosecond. I let it ring twice before answering, taking a slow sip of my scotch. "Elena," he said, his voice strained, all professional pleasantries jettisoned. "It's Martin. I'm sorry to call so late, but we just received a notice from Oratech terminating the merger agreement. There must be some kind of mistake, a clerical error." "No mistake, Martin," I said coolly, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. He was silent for a moment, processing. But we're set to sign on Monday," he stammered, the panic now clearly audible. "The board has already approved. Shareholders are expecting this. Our stock will be eviscerated." "Then the board should have thought about that before their CEO publicly humiliated me at dinner tonight," I replied, my voice as cold as the ice in my drink. Another longer silence. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the desperate calculations. Then quietly, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "What did Donovan do?" I took another sip. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of a story. "Ask him yourself," I said, my tone clipped and final. "I'm sure he'll give you his version. Good night, Martin." I hung up before he could respond and placed the phone face down on the table. The first tremor had hit, soon the earthquake would follow. I stared out at the sleeping city, wondering if Donovan would make the connection immediately, or if it would take him a while to realize that the garbage he had so casually dismissed now controlled the one thing his company needed to survive the next fiscal year. The sun rose over the city, casting long, sharp shadows between the skyscrapers. While Donovan Harrington's world was likely descending into chaos, mine began with its usual, disciplined calm. A 5-mile run through the waking city, a scalding hot shower, and a simple breakfast of black coffee and toast. I was reviewing quarterly reports at my kitchen island, the crisp data a soothing balm to the lingering turmoil of the night before, when the numbers began to tell their own story of revenge. By 7 a.m., my phone had logged 47 missed calls. A frantic barrage from Martin Keating, a dozen from Leo's mother, Amelia, each one no doubt a tearful plea for reconciliation. and 6 in quick succession from Donovan Harrington himself. I savored that. The great Donovan Harrington, a man who probably hadn't dialed his own phone in a decade, reduced to repeatedly calling someone he had declared garbage just hours before. It must have been killing him. Just as I was pouring my second cup of coffee, Maya called, her voice a shot of pure adrenaline. Good morning, Elena. The Financial Times and Bloomberg both got wind of the terminated merger. They're blowing up my phone, wanting a statement. It's officially a bloodbath. Harrington Industries' pre-market stock has plummeted 32%. I took a slow sip of my coffee, the warmth spreading through me. 32%, a number so catastrophic it was beautiful. Tell them, I said, my voice measured, that Oratech has decided to explore other opportunities that better align with our corporate values and our long-term vision for the future. Vague and utterly devastating, Maya said with undisguised glee. I love it. It implies a moral failing on their part without giving any specifics. The market will feast on the speculation. She paused, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Also, you might want to look out your window. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling glass, my coffee mug warm in my hands. Down below, on the street in front of my gleaming corporate headquarters, a chaotic scene was unfolding. A small cluster of reporters and photographers were gathered, their cameras aimed at the building's entrance. A sleek black town car was idling at the curb. Is that? Yep, Maya confirmed. Donovan Harrington is in your lobby and he's not happy. I watched as he argued with my head of security, his face a mask of crimson fury. The king had come to the garbage dump demanding an audience. The thought was so satisfying I almost laughed. I took another slow sip of my coffee, the chaos on the street below feeling as distant as a scene from a movie. He's making quite a scene, Maya continued, her voice a mixture of professional reporting and personal amusement. He's not requesting to see you, he's demanding it. My head of security, a very large man named Marcus who used to be a Navy SEAL, looks like he's trying to reason with a volcano. I could picture it perfectly. Donovan, accustomed to a world that bent to his will, utterly bewildered by a security guard who didn't immediately capitulate. He's throwing around his name like it's a weapon, but Marcus is not impressed. Should I have him removed? A lesser version of myself, the one who used to sleep in laundromats, would have said yes. The temptation to have him physically ejected from my building to complete his humiliation was a sweet, dark pull. But the CEO and me knew better. A scene like that would leak to the press and make me look petty. My revenge had to be clean, strategic, and utterly devastating on a corporate level, not a personal one. At least not visibly. No, I said, setting down my mug. A plan was already forming, a series of moves on a chessboard only I could see. Send him up. Maya was silent for a beat. To your office. No, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. Put him in conference room C and make him wait. Let's say 30 minutes, I'm finishing my breakfast. I could practically hear Maya's grin through the phone. Conference room C, the one with the bad air circulation and the chairs that were clearly designed by a sadist. That's the one, I confirmed. Offer him water, nothing else, and make sure the thermostat is set just a little too high. You're evil, she whispered, the words a compliment between us. I absolutely love it. I'll prep the room myself. Enjoy your breakfast, Elena. She hung up and I took a deliberate, leisurely bite of my toast. I finished my breakfast, read through the morning's financial briefings, and then took my time getting ready. 45 minutes later, I finally walked into conference room C. The air was stuffy just as I'd intended, and there he was. Donovan Harrington, looking significantly less imposing than he had the night before. His usually perfect silver hair was disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it in frustration. His tailored suit was rumpled. The man who had lorded over his dinner table like a king now looked exactly like what he was, A desperate CEO watching his company's future evaporate before his very eyes. The hunter had become the hunted, and he was trapped in my cage. He stood the moment I entered, a jerky, awkward movement that betrayed his desperation. I could see how much it cost him, how every fiber of his being rebelled against showing deference to me. Elena, he said, forcing my name through his teeth, thank you for seeing me. I didn't respond. I walked to the head of the long, polished table and sat down, leaving him standing there in the middle of the room. I didn't offer him a seat. I didn't offer him a handshake. I just looked at him, my expression a blank slate, and let the uncomfortable silence stretch. Finally, after a long, agonizing moment, he seemed to realize I wasn't going to make this easy for him and sank into one of the uncomfortable chairs. You have 5 minutes, I said, my voice flat. He swallowed his pride like it was broken glass. I wanted to apologize for last night, he began, the words sounding rehearsed and foreign in his mouth. My words were inappropriate. Inappropriate, I let out a short, sharp laugh devoid of any humor. Donovan, inappropriate is wearing white after Labor Day. You called me garbage. You publicly humiliated me in your own home, at your own table, while I was there as your son's girlfriend and, more importantly, as your guest. You didn't just break a rule of etiquette, you took a sledgehammer to the most basic tenet of human decency. I was drunk, he insisted, falling back on the coward's oldest excuse. No, I cut him off, my voice like a whip crack. You were honest. There's a saying, in vino veritas, drunk words are sober thoughts. You've thought I was beneath you from the moment Leo introduced us. Last night, you just finally found the courage, fueled by a few glasses of expensive Bordeaux, to say it out loud. His jaw tightened, a muscle flexing in his cheek. Even now, cornered and desperate, he couldn't fully hide his disdain. The mask of contrition was slipping, revealing the same arrogant sneer from the night before. What do you want, Elena? He snapped, his patience gone. An apology, you have it. A public statement retracting my words. I'll have my PR team draft one. Just tell me what it takes. The merger needs to happen, you know it does. Why? I asked, my voice genuinely curious. He blinked, thrown by the simple question. Excuse me. Why does it need to happen? I repeated, leaning forward slightly. Explain it to me, in your own words. Tell me why I should do business with a man who so fundamentally disrespects the very essence of who I am. He had no answer. He just stared at me, his carefully ordered world beginning to short-circuit. Donovan's face flushed a deep, angry red. He was a man accustomed to having the last word, to controlling the narrative, and he was losing control completely. Because it's business, he finally spat, the words a desperate grasp for familiar ground. It's not personal. Whatever happened last night was a personal matter. This is a $2 billion transaction that benefits both our companies. You're letting your feelings cloud your judgment. Everything is personal when you make it personal, Donovan, I replied, my voice dangerously quiet. I stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, gesturing at the sprawling city below. You researched me, right? Dug into my background, found out about the foster homes, the free lunch programs, the night shifts at warehouses to pay for textbooks. He just nodded reluctantly, his jaw tight. But you stopped there, I continued. You saw where I came from and assumed that defined me. You never bothered to look at where I was going, or more importantly, why. I turned back to face him, my silhouette framed against the morning light. Do you know why Oratech is successful, Donovan? Do you know why we are leading the industry while your company is bleeding market share and desperately needs our innovation to survive? Because you have good products, he said, the words sounding like an admission of defeat. No, I corrected him, it's because I remember being hungry. Because I remember being dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated. That memory is burned into the DNA of this company. Every person we hire, every deal we make, every product we develop, I ask myself one question. Are we creating opportunity or are we just protecting privilege? I took a step closer to the table, my voice low and intense. Your company, Donovan, represents everything I built mine to fight against. It's a monument to old money, protecting old ideas, keeping the door bolted shut to anyone who didn't inherit their seat at the table. That's not, he started to protest. Isn't it? I challenged, cutting him off. Name one person on your executive board who didn't go to an Ivy League school. Name one senior vice president who grew up below the poverty line. Name one senior manager who had to work 3 jobs to put themselves through community college. I let the questions hang in the air, each one a hammer blow against his crumbling facade. His silence was the only answer I needed. The merger is dead, Donovan, I said, my voice leaving no room for negotiation. And not because you insulted me. It's dead because you showed me who you really are, and more importantly, you showed me who your company really is. It's an artifact, a relic from an era that is ending, and I have no interest in acquiring a museum piece. This will destroy us, he said, the words a quiet admission of utter defeat. Without this merger, Harrington Industries won't survive the next 2 years, it's over. Then maybe it shouldn't, I replied, heading for the door. Maybe it's time for the old guard to make way for companies that judge people on their potential, not their pedigree. I had my hand on the doorknob when his voice, sharp with a new kind of desperation, stopped me. Wait, he stood up so fast his chair tipped over, crashing to the floor with a loud clatter that echoed in the tense silence. What about Leo? You're going to destroy his father's company, his inheritance, everything I built for him. I paused at the door, but I didn't turn around. I didn't need to see his face to know the manipulative game he was playing. Leo is brilliant, talented, and more capable than you ever gave him credit for, I said, my voice cold and clear. He doesn't need to inherit success, he can build his own. That's the fundamental difference between us, Donovan. You see inheritance as a destiny, I see it as a crutch. You spent your life building a safety net for your son, I'm building him a launch pad. He'll never forgive you for this, he snarled, his last pathetic attempt to wound me. I finally turned, my hand still on the door, and gave him a small, pitying smile. Maybe not, I conceded, but at least he'll know I have principles that can't be bought or intimidated away. I let my eyes drift over his rumpled suit and defeated posture. Can you say the same? I left him there, standing amidst the ruins of his own making, and went back to my office. Maya was waiting with a stack of messages and a look of triumphant satisfaction. Her fight was my fight, that's what real loyalty looked like. Fairchild Corporation wants to meet Monday morning, Maya said, her voice a low hum of satisfaction as she handed me a printout of their eager email. They're very interested in discussing an acquisition. Good, I said, barely glancing at the paper. Make sure Donovan hears about it through back channels by this afternoon. Let him marinate in it over the weekend. Already arranged for the information to leak through a trusted source at Morgan Stanley, she replied with a sharp grin. She was always 2 steps ahead. She paused. Leo is in your private office. My heart, which had been beating with the steady rhythm of a metronome, skipped. How long? About an hour. I brought him coffee and tissues, she said gently. He called the office main line asking for you. When I told him you were in a meeting with his father, he just asked if he could wait. Given the circumstances, I thought you wouldn't mind. She had made the right call. The war was with Donovan, not his son. I pushed open the heavy oak door to my private office. He was curled up in my large leather desk chair, looking small and lost against the backdrop of the city skyline. His eyes were red-rimmed but dry. He looked up when I entered, and in his face I saw the perfect, painful synthesis of his parents. His father's strong jawline, but his mother's kind, gentle eyes. Hi, he said softly. Hi, I replied, my voice equally quiet. I heard what you told him, he said, his gaze unwavering. Maya let me watch the confrontation on the conference room security feed. I sat on the edge of my desk, a few feet from him, unsure what to say, and I think he stood up then, coming to stand between my knees, his hands finding mine. His touch was hesitant, seeking reassurance. I think I've been a coward, letting him treat you that way for so long, making excuses, telling myself it would get better. Leo, no, you don't have to. Let me finish, he insisted, his grip tightening. I've spent my whole life benefiting from his prejudices without ever challenging them. Last night, watching him humiliate you, I was ashamed, not of you, of him, and of myself for not standing up to him sooner, for not walking out of that room with you. What are you saying? I whispered, my heart aching for him. I'm saying that if you'll still have me, he said, his voice thick with emotion but his eyes clear and resolute. I want to build something new with you, without my family's money or their connections or their conditional, toxic approval. I pulled him close, my arms wrapping around him. Are you sure? I murmured into his hair. He's right about one thing, walking away from that inheritance is no small thing. He pulled back and laughed, a genuine, beautiful sound that felt like the first ray of sun after a long storm. Elena Thorne, he said, a slow, adoring smile spreading across his face. You just terminated a $2 billion merger because my father was rude to you. I think we'll figure out the money part. The weight of the last 12 hours began to lift. In that moment, he wasn't the prince of a fallen kingdom. He was just the man I loved, choosing me over everything else. I love you, I said, the words feeling more real and profound than ever before. I love you too, he replied, his voice steady, even if you did just declare a corporate war on my father. I pulled back, a slow, dangerous smile playing on my lips. Especially because I declared a corporate war on your father. Especially because of that, he agreed, leaning in to kiss me, a kiss that sealed a new alliance, a new beginning. But before his lips met mine, my phone, still sitting on the desk, buzzed with an insistent, sharp vibration. It was Maya. I put the phone on speaker, a silent invitation for Leo to be part of this, a sign that there were no more secrets. Ma'am, Maya's voice was a low, urgent hum. Intel just came in. Donovan Harrington is holding an emergency board meeting right now. Our sources say they're in full-blown panic mode, trying to figure out how to approach you, how to salvage the deal. This was it, the moment of maximum leverage. The king was wounded, his council was in chaos, and I held the only antidote. Maya, I said, my voice cold and precise, I want you to get a message to Sarah Bishop on the Harrington board, discreetly. Bishop is their lead independent director. What's the message? Tell her, I said, my eyes locking with Leo's, that Oratech might be willing to entertain a discussion about a merger with Harrington Industries, under new leadership. Emphasis on new. Leo's eyes widened. He understood the implication immediately. This wasn't just about killing the deal anymore. This was a coup. You're going to oust my father from his own company, he breathed, a statement of fact, not an accusation. I'm going to give the board a choice, I corrected him gently, evolve or perish. What they do with that choice is up to them. They can cling to a past that is actively bankrupting them, or they can choose a future. He thought about it for a long, silent moment, the full weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. This was the point of no return. Then he gave a slow, deliberate nod. He won't go quietly, he warned. I wouldn't expect him to, I said. This is going to get ugly. Probably, he agreed, a wry smile touching his lips for the first time. My mother will cry. Definitely. My sister will probably write another one of her terrible acoustic songs about family drama. God help us all, I said, and he laughed. He leaned his forehead against mine, his smile sharp and beautiful and a little bit dangerous. So, he whispered, the word a thrill against my skin, when do we start? I smiled back, the final pieces of the chessboard clicking into place in my mind. How about now? And that's how the woman dismissed as garbage began the work of toppling an empire. Not with a sword or an army, but with a simple, undeniable truth whispered into the right ear at the right time. Respect isn't inherited, it's earned. And those who refuse to give it are about to find out just how much it costs to lose it. The war was surprisingly short. When a board of directors is faced with a choice between loyalty to a toxic founder and complete financial annihilation, they tend to make the pragmatic decision. By the following Monday, Donovan Harrington was no longer CEO of Harrington Industries. His ousting was a quiet, brutal affair, executed in a sterile boardroom with a series of unanimous votes. By Tuesday, Oratech had officially announced its friendly acquisition of the newly restructured Harrington Industries, a move the financial press hailed as a brilliant and strategic consolidation of power. By Wednesday, Leo had accepted a position as our new head of strategic development, turning down a spiteful, last-minute offer from his father to fund a rival venture. He chose to build, not to burn. And by Thursday, Donovan Harrington had learned the most expensive lesson of his life. Never call someone garbage unless you're prepared to be thrown out with it. 6 months later, Leo and I were engaged. We planned a small, private ceremony on a cliffside in Italy, far away from his father's tarnished social circle. Donovan hadn't spoken to either of us since his removal, a silence that was a gift. Leo's mother, however, called weekly, and in her quiet, hesitant voice, she was slowly, painstakingly rebuilding a relationship with her son, one founded on new, more honest terms, free from the shadow of her husband's tyranny. And that's how the nobody dadding the prince became the queen who toppled a kingdom. Not with a sword or an army, but with a simple, unshakable truth: respect isn't inherited, it's earned. And those who refuse to give it, well, they learn the hard way that sometimes the garbage takes itself out and takes everything else with it. Before you go, here's a quick bonus for sticking around. If you love learning and growing like I do, you need to try audiobooks. I've got an exclusive deal with Audible. Your first month is completely free. That's access to over 500,000 titles, zero cost to you. All the details are waiting in the description. Don't miss this one.